In a vast cathedral carved from ancient stone, flickering candlelight cast wavering shadows on cold pillars. A little girl stood at its heart, velvet robes drowning her narrow frame, a crown so large it slipped across her brow. Only 12 summers had passed over her, yet tonight she was offered to a man twice her age, a stranger in royal robes, carrying the silent gravity of power. All around, armored knights and lords in brocade whispered from behind bejeweled masks, their gazes sharp with calculation, but empty of compassion. To them, she was no child, merely a living treaty, her worth counted in unborn heirs. The priest's Latin chant rose and fell like distant thunder, each word erasing fragments of childhood she could never recover. Her small fingers clutched at a wooden doll paint choked by years of whispered secrets and bedtime prayers. Behind the jeweled veil, her mind fled to gardens heavy with spring blossom, to her mother's lullabies, to laughter carried on warm breezes, echoes of innocence slipping beyond reach. Trumpets blared as the final blessing sounded, their brass voices sealing her fate. A name she had never chosen was proclaimed beside new titles she barely understood. In that moment, a kingdom exhaled its relief. But somewhere deep within, a softer voice trembled, will anyone remember who I truly was? Hand in hand with her husband, each step down the aisle weighed upon her small shoulders. Outside, bells pealed in triumph. Inside, something fragile and unseen cracked. Sorrow rooted itself where laughter had once lived, silent and unyielding. When night fell, darkness filled the bridal chamber, its walls heavy with tapestries of saints and kings, whose eyes offered no solace. She sat at the bed's edge, small hands pale against silk, heartbeat loud enough to echo in her skull. The door opened. He entered wearing duty, like a second skin, gentleness buried under centuries of expectation. He was not cruel yet. There was no kindness to warm the chill in her chest. What unfolded belonged not to them, but to history, a ritual older than memory itself. Fear gripped her like winter frost, tightening until breath itself felt borrowed. Her mother had once whispered of love as soft laughter and shared secrets in moonlit gardens. But here love had no voice. Stone walls drank in the quiet breaking of a child's spirit. The shadows offered no refuge. When it ended, she lay silent, gaze fixed on carved beams above, tears salted on her cheeks. In the hush that followed, she dared to ask the darkness, is this what it means to be queen? But only silence answered. By dawn, exhaustion had stolen the last of her tears, leaving behind something cold and hollow. Morning returned her to ceremony. Servants approached like ghosts, draping silk-weaving braids, smoothing every crease without ever lifting their eyes to hers. At 12, she sat beside a husband, cloaked in dynastic ambition, her feet dangling above marble floors. Eyes followed her everywhere, courtiers measuring each glance, each breath, searching for signs of strength or weakness. Even the gentle maid who had once smiled now looked away, as if the girl she had known no longer existed. Yet sometimes, when no one watched, she remembered to be young. In secret gardens, she wove crowns of grass, pressed her cheek to cool stone, and whispered hopes to the wind, small rebellions against the life forced upon her. But the world beyond those walls expected only silence, stillness, submission. At night, she pressed her chipped doll to her chest, its painted face worn and comforting. I'm afraid she would whisper into the dark. But dawn always returned, demanding the mask of queenship be worn once more. Slowly, her name faded beneath titles, her laughter buried under layers of silk. The girl she had been dissolved, replaced by the figure duty demanded, watched by all, known by none. Seasons turned quietly each sunrise, stealing more of her girlhood. At 13, she felt life flutter beneath her ribs, a movement both wondrous and terrifying. Her narrow body, barely grown, became the vessel of a kingdom's desperate hope. Midwives hovered like shadows, their faces careful, words measured. In polished bronze mirrors, she sought signs of transformation into the woman everyone expected. Yet always the reflection showed a child's face shadowed by fear. By candlelight, she spoke softly to the child within. Will you survive, will I? But memory answered instead. Stories of brides who bled, of girls who never rose from childbed. The palace walls, once grand, now felt like stone cages. Her husband's hand rested lightly on her swelling belly, more gesture than affection. What bound them was not love, but the invisible chains of ancestry and survival. Winter brought priests whispering blessings, physicians offering bitter draughts and ancient prayers. Yet none could quiet the voice within her, repeating like an unbroken lament, what if I do not survive? Beyond her chamber, the kingdom celebrated names, chosen feast planned. Yet no one asked what she wished. The voice that had once been curious and bright now lay buried, unheard, unnecessary. Beneath embroidered silks and gold thread, a child waited, forced to become a mother before she had truly been alive. Then came the night of reckoning. Winter winds howled against stone, rattling windows and shaking banners. Pain arrived sharp and merciless, each contraction a jagged blade carving through her resolve. The chamber swarmed with midwives and whispered prayers. Sweat soaked her brow, breath came ragged. In the blur of agony, visions danced behind her eyes, her mother's face, gardens in summer, a doll left waiting on the pillow. Hours dragged, each heartbeat an eternity. Finally, a newborn's cry pierced the suffocating silence, a sound frail yet triumphant. They placed the child briefly on her chest, tiny fingers curled against her trembling skin, warmth blooming in that stolen moment. Yet even love was not hers to keep. The infant was lifted away, carried to waiting courtiers, proof that the bloodline endured. Left alone, her body bruised and spirit spent, she traced invisible patterns on the canopy overhead. Through cracked lips, she whispered a vow. Even if the world sees you only as an heir, I will see you as my child. Beyond those walls, bells tolled in celebration. Within, a girl lay in the shadow of a crown, forever changed by pain and a love the world would never record. Days became weeks. The court praised her courage, yet behind smiles lay only relief, a future secured. Her body weakened by blood and fever moved like something borrowed. Nights brought haunting dreams of the birth, and mornings brought whispered questions. Will she bear again? Will she live long enough? Her husband offered polite gratitude, then returned to counsels and maps. The infant, swaddled in gold-embroidered cloth, was shown to foreign envoys, but rarely to the girl who had borne him. She clung to fleeting moments, rocking the child as servants pretended not to see. In those quiet minutes, love bloomed raw, real, and fiercely protective. But duty loomed always its shadow longer than the dawn. Whispers followed her through cold corridors. Too young, too frail. Perhaps another wife will be needed. Even in recovery, she was not a girl, nor truly a mother, only a vessel her worth counted in the children she might yet produce. In her late teens, sickness returned. Fever stole her strength. Shadows deepened beneath her eyes. One winter morning, as the bells began to toll, the child queen slipped silently from life to memory. In her coffin, they placed the worn doll against her still heart, a final reminder of the girl no one had truly seen. Centuries passed. Her name remained in chronicles, reduced to a footnote. The young queen who bore an heir and died young. Tourists now gaze at her portrait, a solemn child crowned in gold, eyes dark with knowledge beyond her years. But scrolls and stones forget what mattered most. The whispered fears at midnight, the quiet love for a newborn, the laughter buried beneath silk and iron. Across kingdoms, countless royal daughters shared her fate, childhood traded for treaties, hearts silenced by duty. History remembers kings who conquered, but forgets the girls who paid the price. Their stories linger only in shadows, echoes, in cold corridors, secrets in forgotten chapels. Perhaps by remembering her not as a queen, but as a child forced too soon into womanhood, we reclaim what history erased, a trembling voice in candlelit silence, a promise whispered through pain, and a love strong enough to defy stone and crown alike. And in that, remembering her story becomes more than sorrow. It becomes testament to innocence, stolen to silent bravery, and to a truth too easily forgotten, that even the mightiest crowns rest upon hearts too young to break. And so centuries turned, empires crumbled, and new crowns rose from old ashes. Yet the portrait of that young queen still hangs, eyes cast down, mouth unsmiling. History remembers her as a footnote, a child bride who secured a dynasty then faded into silence. But if we look closer, beyond gold frames and brittle scrolls, we see not just a queen, but a child who loved a simple wooden doll, who whispered her fears into the night, and who dared, even in her last breath, to love a child the world saw only as an heir. Her story reminds us of a truth too easily forgotten. Behind every title, every crown, beats a human heart, often too young, too soft, too easily broken. Power builds walls of stone, but even stone cannot silence a mother's whisper, nor erase the pain of innocence stolen. The lesson she leaves us is this: judge history not only by the triumphs of kings, but by the cost paid in childhoods, surrendered voices silenced, and lives unlived. Remember that real strength sometimes lies not in conquest, but in quiet endurance, and that the weight of a crown can crush the tenderest soul. Perhaps in telling her story not as legend, but as the tragedy of a lost childhood, we give voice to countless others whose names time has buried. And in that remembering, we find compassion not just for a long-dead queen, but for every fragile heart forced to grow up too soon. Because even the mightiest empires rest upon shoulders too small to bear them. And true history lives not only in marble statues and royal chronicles, but in the softest of whispers, the quietest of prayers, and the forgotten tears of a little girl who never truly got to be one.